Constance could not tell anyone who the father was, not when her mother cried, nor when her father yelled, not even when her older sister Emily sat on her bed and crossed her arms, rocking her gently. Constance was 4 months pregnant when she told her family, and already beginning to show. Emily was furious at her for not picking up the signs earlier. The baggy clothes Constance was preferring over her usual tailored look, out of her control of appetite, her strange secretiveness. It all seemed so obvious now. Still, how could anyone be expected to guess this? This was Constance, after all. Constance was meekly obedient, Constance the brim of proper, Constance the chronically shy. She was supposed to be the good daughter. But then, of course, there was that other thing. But I thought you didn't like boys, Emily pressed. Constance wrinkled her nose in disdain. I don't, she replied emphatically. But I wouldn't say I call them all a boy, she added with a shy smile. Emily jerked away in shock. What? She cried. Constance lifted a hand up to her mouth to stifle a giggle. How old is this guy? Emily asked, unable to keep the stern edge out of her voice. I don't know, Constance confessed, her smile suddenly fading. She began wiring her hands. Pretty old, I think. You think? Constance shrugged. Connie, who? No! Constance yelled, so suddenly and so loud that Emily gave a startled jump. Constance reached out and clasped Emily's hands tightly in her own. Emily, she pleaded, don't ask me that, please. I swore I'd never tell. Emily snatched her hands away. She could feel the anger rising in her throat like bile. Connie, if you're protecting some creep... Constance laughed. Emily didn't see what was so funny. It's not like that, she insisted with her fit of giggles subsided. It's more like... She paused and started off somewhere in the middle distance, over Emily's shoulder. It's like, have you ever had a secret that you didn't want to tell anyone because it would make it less special? Less yours? Emily nodded slowly. Although she wasn't like that, sure she had liked that, but wasn't part of the fun of having a secret to tell someone. It's not like that, Constance continued. This belongs to me, and I don't want to share it with anybody. Not even me? Emily wheeled, but Constance just continued to stare at nothing, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. The last few months leading up to Constance's confinement were intense. To say the least, Constance's condition could not be kept a secret for long. In the way of the small towns, once a person found out, news spread like a virus, persistent and incredulous. Rumors abounded about the identity of the father, and it seemed that there's no male with any link of Constance was exempt from having gleefully accusatory fingers pointed in his direction. Her schoolmates, her teachers, and even her doctor. One particularly malicious gossip suggested that the real reason Constance would not talk about the father was because it was her own father. When Emily heard his rumor, she tracked it back to source, a pimpy little boy in year 8, and had delivered such one devastating punch to the blemished features, earning herself a week's suspension and the boy bloody nose and split lip. Things were more strained at home. Dinners had become silent affair. Neither the parents so much as glancing up from their plates to look at Constance. Emily had to grit her teeth in rage that the familiar bond and the linked parents and daughters could have been proven to be so weak. What surprised Emily more than anything, though, was how unfazed Constance seemed to be by all this. Where every whispered slur on the raised eyebrows caused Emily to bristle, Constance breathed through her days with her head held high as tough, completely obvious to the shame that her family felt, that people expected her to feel. Amidst the murk and mire and the casual cruelty, Constance glowed. Emily had never loved her sister more. When the child had arrived, and Emily was finally allowed to visit, she was dumbstruck. There was Constance, sweaty and tired and eye out but beaming. Her arms held a tiny wrinkled form of Constance's son, James. Constance formed her without looking up. The fact that he was her little sister, her own Connie, had treated this person, though From nothing filled Emily with a quiet awe. When Constance's family tore her love-struck gaze from her new baby and looked up, Emily saw that her sister's eyes were filled with tears. She felt a lump rise in her throat. The sisters' eyes locked, and they were both overcome with joy and bright in the intense that looked like it would last forever. It did not. Failure to thrive was the term the parents and the practitioner used, but it was used to amounted to that. Despite apparently feeling normally, James was not putting on any weight. In fact, it was over 12 weeks. James had dropped down almost 200 grams below his birth weight. They ran all kinds of tests. Emily accompanied her sister and nephew to what seemed like an endless cycle of doctor's offices, waiting rooms, and consulting suits. They were sympathetic people with stethoscopes and about their necks spoke in the hushed tone of the things like cardiac relention or metabolic demand. All Constance ever seemed to be able to pay in response was, "Oh." As days passed, Emily could do is watch her sister grew paler and more anxious. As James lost weight, Constance did too. Seemed to diminish. She became absent-minded and vague, forgetting tasks part ways through and often trailing off into mid-sentences. She drew herself upon the unit, and she had a little more substance than her own shadow. Emily wanted to help Constance, but it was like all she could no longer reach her. With every day, Constance sank deeper and deeper into some dark pit, and however she tried, Emily just couldn't follow her. All the tests came back negative. With every result, Emily saw relief, finding the anxiety in her sister's drawn face. So James didn't have a cystic fibrosis or diabetes or hyperthyroidism. But what was wrong with him? Emily was not sure what had woken her up. She lay there for some time early morning chill, staring blankly at the ceiling with a sense of dread slowly crept up on her, starting the feeling of discomfort in her belly, accumulating with the dull thudding in her breast. It was then she noticed a sickly yellow light seeping under from her bedroom door. She rolled her face to the glow and noticed, and as she did, her alarm clock displayed 2:15 a.m. Too late for her parents, and too early for Constance, surely. Reluctantly, Emily dragged her feet and her sleep-heavy body out of bed and shuffled towards her bedroom door. When she opened it, she saw the source of light. It was none of the other bedrooms, but rather the kitchen across the hallway. Grumbling to herself, Emily made her shambling progress towards the kitchen, where she found the fridge door, wide open and humming slightly. Still groggy, she vaguely noticed that the fridge's contents were in the greater state of disarray than usual. Before closing the door and making her way back to her bedroom, halfway down the hallway, Emily halted as she heard the noise coming from their Constance's bedroom. A soft susurration. She recognized her sister's voice, but the pitch was too low for her to make out the words. Emily began to move again, but something in the tone of her voice emanating from the darkness of Constance's room stayed her. A wielding note edged with her quiet urgency, and brought back creeping dread that first dragged her from her slumber. "Connie?" Emily asked anxiously, as she opened the door. When she heard no response, it was just a continuation of Constance's hushed whispers. Emily flicked on the light. Constance was bent over James's crib, and it took several moments before she straightened up. Blinking at the light, she turned to face her sister. Emily stifled down her own cries of surprise when she saw Constance's face. The young girl's eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep, and dark rings hung below them. It was not this took Emily aback. However, those expression in those strained eyes, a startled, trapped look, almost feral in its intensity, flicked across Constance's eyes, rendering the familiar features to the alien to Emily. It was Constance who broke the silence. "He won't eat," she said to Emily, her tone desperate. "I don't know what he eats." Emily's eyes darted down as she saw that her sister was clutching something tightly in her right hand, a lumpy mass that dripped onto the rug. so incredulous that it was a sight that Emily did not immediately register what was raw steak. Emily stared in mute shock while her mind reeled. What was the Constance doing with that meat? What was she thinking? Emily swallowed the lump in her throat and began, slowly with soothing noises, to advance on Constance. "Shh, Connie," she crooned gently. "Shh." When Emily reached her younger sister, she took her hands, which she saw they were trembling violently, in her own, surreptitiously removing the slab of meat and placing it on the changing table. She glanced down at the crib and noted that James seemed to be sleeping soundly. Greatly she guided Constance back to her bed and persuaded her to lie down. Once she was beneath the covers, Constance began to weep softly. "I don't know what he eats," she croaked out between sobs. Emily stayed seated on her sister's edge of their bed and stroked her long dark hair until she fell asleep. That feeling uneasiness stayed with Emily throughout the next day. It was Saturday and her friends wanted to go to the movies, but she blew them off. Her parents were both away for the weekend, and the idea of sitting there in the dark while Constance stayed at home alone with James was intolerable to Emily. It said she spent the entire day just hanging around the house, unable to commit herself to any activity more than a few minutes. She found herself hovering over around Constance and watching her critically. She couldn't seem to get out of her head that image of Constance standing over James's crib with the lights out, clutching a chunk of meat. For her part, Constance behaved as if the previous night had not happened at all. She changed James and bathed him. She gave him his formula and even played with him on the lounge room floor, tickling his feet and blowing raspberries on his too flat tummy. She would lift him up in the air and kiss him in mid, almost as if for a moment she did not notice the worrying convulsiveness of her son's belly. As Emily watched Constance, however, she could not keep herself from thinking that her sister's smile looked strangely painted on, and there was something more than just fatigue behind her red-rimmed eyes. Emily slept fitfully that night. Her sleep was disturbed by the strange nightmares that, although she forgot her constant almost immediately after she woke, her feeling shaky and disoriented. With a sudden wail from James's pierced in the night, Emily immediately sat bolt upright, then propelled herself out of bed, almost as if she had registered what that sound was. She heard James's cries often enough to be familiar to them, and could even tune them out in most nights. But they were different this time. These cries were much, much louder than normal, but also strangely wet. It was as if the infant were choking on some sort of fluid. Emily threw the door to Constance's room open. "Connie, what's wrong?" she gasped, feeling with each breath that she may choke on her own heart. She was in a rush. She forgot to switch on the lights, and she started to charge for the door, ran towards her sister. "I heard—" "Oh!" came Constance's voice, startled cry as she dropped something on the floor. A bloody kitchen knife. "What? What have you done?" Emily whispered. She took a step towards Constance, and then she turned and ran up to her crib, where James had suddenly stopped piercing the wails. Emily was shaking now, staring down at her nephew. There was a jagged line that ran across the child's belly, starting at the base of the throat, running all the way down to his navel. To Emily's horror, the gash had begun to gape, exposing the body, red interior, out of the protrude and shatter the remains of James's rib cage, now just jagged fragments of bone. "Oh my God, Connie! What have you done?" Emily braced herself again against the side of the crib as she fought the waves of nausea and disbelief. She felt her head spin and her vision begin to blur as her breath caught in her throat. Still, she couldn't tear any of her eyes away from her nephew's twisted form. After what seemed like an immemorable time, Emily's breath returned to her, although it was shallow and ragged, as her vision had cleared up, adjusted to the faint light that filtered in from an open curtain. She had realized she had made a mistake. In her eternal shock, Emily had just thought the white shards in James's split torso to be the ribs, but now she saw was this and not the case at all. They were teeth. Great, jagged teeth set on the throat, sideways to the mouth that almost length of James's tiny body. As Emily watched, that terrible never mouth begin to gape open again, wider this time, and this time out of the form of the impossible depths of the snaked black, slimy tendril that could be only used as a tongue. Letting out a tangled cry, Emily stumbled backwards when she watched as the tongue rose out of the crib, flailing back and forth as she was tasting the air. The tongue had reached all the way to the changing table and began to tap on its surface, exploring. It was then that Emily saw the rat, a fuzzy mound lying on the changing table, its head crudely cut off. As Emily watched, the tongue slowly slid towards the inherent rodent, and then with horrible deftness wrapped around it and lifted off the table, pulling it back towards the crib with a terrible, waiting maw. The tongue had made a wet, slurping noises and retreated back behind the crooked fangs. From somewhere behind Emily came a weak cry of, "Oh!" Emily had forgotten that Constance was even there. She turned and saw Constance standing there, her hands clasped so tightly around that their knuckles were white. Her moist, feeble eyes glittered in the dim light. Emily saw that there was no fear in those eyes, only wonder. "Oh, Emily!" Constance sighed again, and then rapturously replied, "He looks just like his father." What's up, my pretties? It's the Lion Queen here. I want to appreciate you all for tuning into this video, and I do appreciate you guys supporting my video by giving this video likes and stuff. If you really enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, comment and subscribe if you're new, ring the bell for notifications to when I upload so that way you guys will get updated for whenever I upload. If you want to follow me on Twitter or DeviantArt, feel free to leave a follow on those if you are interested in following me on those socials. If you want to support my backup channel, known as Miss Dark Shigo, feel free to subscribe to it, as a link to that will also be in the About page section. And with that being said, and that being the case, thank you so much for watching, my pretties, and as always, please stay pretty.